Okay, hello all. It's John Dove from the Advocacy Club. And we've had an interesting session tonight on public speaking and presentation skills. So I'm just going to share some feedback now from tonight's session that may help you with your public speaking. One of the things that's been brought up tonight is how to begin a presentation. Now, there are multiple ways to start a presentation or any form of speech. But the key thing to remember is that the beginning of your presentation is the first thing that the audience is going to hear. So you need to grab the attention of the audience at the outset. It can't be boring. It can't move in too slowly. You need to really grab the attention of the audience from the outset. So there are multiple ways of doing this. One of my favorite techniques is the use of the rhetorical question at the outset. The reason I like the rhetorical question is because you're posing a question to the audience and straight away you're getting the audience to think about your subject matter and think about what it is you're going to be talking about. So, for example, we had a speech tonight talking about how we deal with challenges and how we deal with adversity. So a good way to begin that presentation may have been, ladies and gentlemen, how do you deal with difficult situations? And then pause. Have a pause there at that point. Let the question sink in. Let the audience have a think about that question. And then you can move on to the remainder of your introduction from there. Equally, you can ask your audience for a show of hands as well if you're going to be asking a question. Could be a good way of relaxing the audience. That way, they have a little look around. Other ways that you can sort of pique the interest of the audience at the beginning of the presentation could be a really bold statement. It could be a bold fact relating to what you're going to talk about. So something at the start to really grab the attention and, most importantly, build rapport with the audience at the outset. So that's how you sort of begin the presentation. So I'll just go on and start talking about various things that I've noticed tonight. And of all of the speakers that I watched, I can commend them all because none of the speakers tonight used any filler words. And it's very tempting because it's something that we do in everyday life to include filler words such as ums, your nose, whatever it might be. Very easy for those to creep in when it comes to public speaking, but it can become distracting. And particularly if you use it quite regularly, the audience can turn around and start in their head thinking, I'm going to start counting these. How much time is there between filler words? And if the audience start thinking too much about your filler words because it's become almost something that they notice, then that can be quite distracting and it can take away from your presentation there. So it's something to really think about and really make a conscious effort to try and exclude filler words from your presentations. Structure is really important as well. So you need a structure that's going to flow. So quite often with most presentations, general rule is you sort of have an introduction, which is whereby you're going to tell the audience what you're going to tell them. And I saw one tonight whereby the speaker said, within my presentation, I'm going to deal with the following 3 points. So we gave a bit of a roadmap at the outset, and so the audience knew where the speech was going to go. You then move into the bulk of the main body. This is the bulk, this is the meat of the presentation. And then lastly, you come on to the conclusion. Now, within the main part of your presentation, you need to find ways of keeping the presentation interesting. So we had somebody that talked about within their presentation going into hospital. And instead of just going, I was in hospital and this is what happened, they mentioned what the symptom was, but not what the cause was. And we didn't know where it was going. And by sort of revealing little bits of information bit by bit by bit, it keeps the audience interested, it keeps us engaged, and it means that we're wanting to listen to what's happening, what's going to happen next in the presentation. Equally, if we're talking about, so we had somebody talking about motorbikes versus cars and the pros and the cons. It's a good way of really examining the topic and really going into detail on that. And then lastly, the conclusion is where you summarize what you've been talking about. But remember that the last sentence is the last thing that your audience hears. So keep it snappy and keep it memorable. When it comes to the voice itself, we need to keep it interesting. So first things first, we need to make sure that we're not talking too quickly. If we talk too quickly, it's hard for the audience to follow what we're saying. So as a general rule, about 100, maybe 120 words per minute is about right. But speaking slowly isn't enough. We need to ensure that the voice is interesting. So if we talk at this sort of level, monotone voice, the audience will switch off very quickly. So it's important to sort of elevate certain parts of the speech, maybe speak slower at certain points, just so the voice is well modulated and it keeps the audience interested. So it changes throughout the presentation. What we can also do as well as a good sort of technique to add emphasis is if an important point is made in the presentation, something really bold throughout the presentation, take a pause at that point, pause for a few seconds, let that point sink in, let the audience take in how significant that was before moving on to the next point. I noticed a number of good metaphors tonight as well. So there were quite a few useful metaphors throughout. So we had somebody who is a career changer. He's got some military background, and he was given a presentation talking about himself, so talking about his military background and then talking about his legal studies. And one of the points he was making is that because he's sort of had a previous career before studying law, it gives him a little bit more experience, which he finds helps him on the law degree. But equally, there are people who go straight into a law degree. And the point he was making is that the difficulty is the same for everyone, regardless of your background, experience, and at what point you're going into this. And he used a really good metaphor to explain this. He said that we're all fighting the same war, but a different battle. So it's a good way of summarizing his point that everybody's got different challenges, but ultimately the goal and the overall challenge is the same for everybody. The last point I'll make relates to the use of notes. So quite often when we draft a presentation, we'll probably draft a piece of prose in full. And then what my technique would be to practice that several times and then work it down into smaller notes, smaller bullet points, etc., to help you. The more you practice, the better you'll become and the more confident you become with your own material. And what that means is that each and every time you deliver your presentation, it's going to come out slightly differently. It's going to come out more, you'll appear a lot more fluid in the way in which you deliver your presentation. And that's where the practice is really important, because the difficulty that you have is that if you don't practice, you then become reliant on the notes. And then sometimes you may even find that you're reading entirely from the notes or mainly from the notes when you deliver your presentation. And that becomes really obvious. And the problem is if you're in person, let's say, and you've got that there, you've got notes in front of you, you've not got eye contact with the audience, and it breaks that eye contact, it breaks that rapport. So it's harder for you to engage with the audience in that situation. Likewise, if you're on Zoom or delivering a talk online and you've got the notes on the screen in front of you, whilst there's no physical piece of paper between you and the audience, it's very, very obvious when your eyes are darting around the screen, moving backwards and forwards. So the key thing to remember is practice, practice, practice. You become more confident with the material. Your presentation will be significantly better. And also you're able to continue to engage with the audience and build that rapport throughout. So those are just the small nuggets of advice that I've got for you tonight. I hope that those have been helpful.